The rain against the window pane was a familiar percussion, a rhythm that had scored the last 9 months of her life. It was a soft, forgiving sound, blurring the hard edges of the city into a watercolor of muted light and shadow. Dr. Eris Thorne sat in a worn armchair, one hand resting on the tight globe of her belly, the other tracing the condensation on the glass. This small apartment, with its second-hand furniture and view of a brick wall, was the safest place she had ever known. It was a fortress built of anonymity, paid for with the last of her savings. 9 months ago, she had lived in a glass penthouse overlooking the Han River, a monument to surgical success and brutalist architecture. She had been the silent partner in the celebrated career of Dr. Marcus Vance, chief of cardiothoracic surgery at Seoul's most prestigious private hospital. He was the face, she was the mind. He presented the papers, she wrote them. He accepted the accolades, she corrected the fatal flaws in his methodologies late into the night. He had a performer's charisma, a smile that could disarm boards of directors, and a voice that could soothe anxious families. She had only the quiet, unnerving hum of her own competence. He had called it a partnership. She had called it survival. Then came the positive test, the two blue lines that drew a new, terrifying line in her life. She had thought, with a naivete that now felt like a different woman's memory, that it would change things, soften him. He had looked at the test stick not as a miracle, but as an administrative error, a complication, an anchor on his ascent. The argument had been brutally short. He did not shout. Shouting was for people who had lost control. Marcus was always in control. His words were scalpels, precise and cold. He spoke of his career trajectory, of obligations, of the unfortunate timing. He used the word inconvenience 3 times. He never once used the word baby. He had not thrown her out with violence. He had simply erased her. Her keycard was deactivated. Her belongings were packed into sterile black boxes and left with the concierge. A severance, he called it, was wired to her account, enough to ensure her silence, not enough to grant her freedom. It was a transaction. He was closing a redundant department. He had not updated the file on her. He was working from a version of Eris Thorne that had never been accurate, a version that was pliant and silent and grateful. He did not account for the resilience forged in a decade of fixing his mistakes. She had taken the money, found this apartment under a different name, and disappeared. She had enough to last until the birth, and perhaps a few months after. Then, she did not know. The terror of that uncertainty was a low-grade fever that never broke. But the quiet was a balm. The silence in the small apartment was not the charged, waiting silence of the penthouse. This was the kind of silence that doesn't echo, the kind that settles. The baby kicked, a sharp, insistent nudge beneath her ribs, a reminder of the deadline, a reminder of the only thing that mattered. She smiled, a real, tired smile that reached her eyes. She had managed. Alone. She had built this small, quiet life, and she would protect it. That was when the knock came. It was not the tentative rap of a delivery driver or the impatient drumming of a neighbor. It was 2 distinct measured impacts against the wood. The sound of intention. The sound of someone who was not used to being kept waiting. Aris froze. Her heart, the organ she understood with an academic's precision, betrayed her. It hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. No one knew she was here. No one. She had cut ties with a surgeon's finality. Her colleagues at the hospital thought she'd taken a research sabbatical abroad. Marcus, she assumed, believed her to be tucked away in some provincial town, quietly managing his inconvenience. The knock came again. 2 more measured beats. Deeper this time, more final. She pushed herself out of the chair, her movements slow and clumsy. The baby shifted, a heavy, unbalancing weight. She did not turn on the hall light. She crept to the door, her hand shaking as she reached for the peephole. The fish-eye lens distorted the hallway, bending the worn carpet and water-stained ceiling into a warped tunnel. At the end of it stood a man. He was a silhouette of impossible tailoring, a charcoal suit that absorbed the dim hallway light, a crisp white shirt, a dark tie knotted with geometric precision. He was not looking at the door, but down at his phone, his thumb moving with economical grace across the screen. Even in the distorted view, she recognized him, not from her life, but from the stratosphere above it. Julian Choi, the chairman of the board of directors for the entire hospital network. A man spoken of in whispers, a figure of almost mythical power who materialized for board meetings and the annual Obsidian Gala, his presence shifting the very atmosphere of a room. He was not just a corporate titan. Rumor painted him with a darker brush. They said his family's empire was built on foundations older and harder than steel and semiconductors. They said he was the quiet sovereign of a world that operated in the shadows. He was a man who did not make house calls, especially not to run down apartment buildings in a forgotten district of Seoul. Eris's mind raced, a frantic search for a logical explanation. A mistake. He had the wrong door, the wrong floor, the wrong universe. She held her breath, praying he would leave. He did not leave. He lifted his head, his gaze directed squarely at the peephole as if he could feel her watching him. His face was calm, his features sharp and unreadable. He had the kind of stillness that was more intimidating than any overt threat. He put his phone away, his hand disappearing into the pocket of his suit jacket, and he waited. He was not performing, he was not impatient. He was simply occupying the space until the inevitable occurred. The world bent to the will of men like Julian Choi. Doors opened. Eris knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that this was not a door she could keep closed. Her hand, slick with sweat, turned the deadbolt. The click was unnaturally loud in the silence. She opened the door a crack, the security chain holding it fast. His eyes met hers. They were dark, intelligent, and missed nothing. They took in the chain, her visible tremor, the swell of her belly hidden behind the door's edge. There was no flicker of recognition, only a polite, detached inquiry. "Good evening," he said. His voice was a low baritone, steady as iron wrapped in silk. "I am looking for Mrs. Kim. I was told this was her residence." Relief washed over Eris, so potent it almost buckled her knees. A mistake. It was just a mistake. Mrs. Kim was the elderly woman she had taken the lease over from, a sweet, grandmotherly type who was moving to the countryside to live with her daughter. "I'm sorry," Eris said, her own voice thin and reedy. "Mrs. Kim moved out almost a year ago." Julian Choi's expression did not change, but a subtle tension entered his stillness. "I see. My apologies for the intrusion." He made no move to leave. His eyes scanned the sliver of the apartment visible behind her. He was processing the timeline, the name on the hospital records. His gaze drifted back to her face, and this time there was a flicker, a spark of connection deep in his dark eyes. He was running a diagnostic, cross-referencing files stored in a formidable memory. "Dr. Thorne," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. The blood drained from her face. The fortress had been breached. The quiet was over. "Chairman Choi," she whispered, the title alien and absurd in the context of her shabby hallway. He saw it all in an instant, the exhaustion etched beneath her eyes, the fierce, protective way she kept the door between them, the undeniable truth of her advanced pregnancy. He had not come here for her, but he had found her. And the logical, ruthless mind that ran a multi-billion-dollar empire and perhaps other things besides began to connect the dots. Dr. Eris Thorne, the hospital's most brilliant and undervalued surgical asset, had taken an abrupt sabbatical 9 months ago. Dr. Marcus Vance, her supervising chief, had announced it with a regret that never quite reached his eyes. And now she was here, hiding, pregnant. Julian Choi's focus narrowed entirely onto her. The problem of the missing Mrs. Kim was archived, a file closed. A new, more critical file had been opened. "May I come in, doctor?" he asked. The politeness was a thin veneer over a core of absolute authority. It was the kind of question that was not a request. She should have said no. She should have closed the door, bolted it, and pushed the armchair against it. It would not have mattered. A man like Julian Choi did not need to break down doors. He simply waited for them to open, and they always did. Her silence was answer enough. She slid the chain free. He stepped inside, bringing the scent of rain, expensive wool, and something else. A clean, cold scent like ozone after a lightning strike. He filled the small entryway, his presence diminishing the already cramped space. His eyes swept the room, not with judgment, but with an unnerving thoroughness. He noted the single armchair, the stack of medical journals on the floor, the small kitchenette with its solitary cup in the drying rack. It was the apartment of a ghost, a life stripped down to its barest essentials. He turned back to her. His gaze dropped to her stomach, and for the first time, a micro-expression crossed his face, a tightening at the corners of his mouth. It was not pity. It was something harder, colder. The look of a man identifying a problem that needed to be solved, a transgression that needed to be balanced. "You are 9 months pregnant," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "I am aware," Eris replied, a spark of her old fire cutting through the fear. She would not be handled. She would not be treated like a case study. A flicker of something, was it respect, appeared in his eyes. He nodded, a small, sharp motion. "Vance," he said. One word. It hung in the air between them, heavy with accusation. Eris flinched. She wrapped her arms around her belly, a reflexive, protective gesture. "My personal life is not the business of the hospital board, Chairman." "When the hospital's most promising surgeon disappears under questionable circumstances and is found in hiding, it becomes the business of the board," he countered, his tone still quiet, still level. "It becomes my business. I am the steward of the hospital's assets, Dr. Thorne. And you are, by a significant margin, our most valuable asset." The word asset should have felt dehumanizing. From Marcus it would have been. From Julian Choi, it sounded like the highest form of compliment. It was a recognition of her skill, her raw, quantifiable worth, stripped of all sentiment. He saw her not as a woman, not as a victim, but as a critical component that had been removed from a machine he controlled. And he was here to put it back. "I am no longer an employee of the hospital," she said, her voice firmer now. "Your sabbatical was approved by my office," he said, a subtle correction. "You are on leave. You have not resigned. An important distinction." He took a step closer, and she fought the instinct to retreat. "Mrs. Kim was a friend of my mother's. I promised to check on her. It seems I have found a far more pressing matter." He looked around the small apartment again, his eyes finally resting on the single window with its view of a brick wall. "This is not a suitable environment." "It's safe," she snapped. "Safety is not the absence of an immediate threat, doctor. It is the absolute certainty that no threat can reach you," he said. "You are not safe here. You are isolated. There is a difference." He pulled out his phone again. His thumb moved with purpose. "I am sending a car. My driver will be here in 15 minutes. Pack a bag." Panic seized her. "A car? For what?" "I'm not going anywhere." He looked up from his phone, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that silenced her protest. "Yes, you are. You are coming with me. Your sabbatical is over. From this moment on, you and your child are under my protection. This is not a negotiation." His driver, a man built with the same quiet solidity as a bank vault, did not speak. He took her single, hastily packed bag and led her to a black sedan that was the automotive equivalent of Julian Choi's suit, understated, expensive, and armored. The doors closed with a heavy, satisfying thud, sealing them in a cocoon of silent, conditioned air. Eris sat beside Julian, the space between them charged with unspoken questions. He did not try to fill the silence. He worked on a tablet, his focus absolute. She watched the rain-streaked city slide by, the familiar, humble streets of her neighborhood giving way to the gleaming towers of Gangnam. She felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if she were a character in a story she was no longer writing. They did not go to a hotel. They drove to a residential skyscraper that pierced the clouds, a needle of dark glass and steel. A private elevator opened directly into a penthouse that made the one she had shared with Marcus look like a student dormitory. It was vast, minimalist, and breathtaking. One entire wall was a sheet of glass, offering a panoramic view of Seoul glittering like a spilled box of diamonds. The furniture was sparse and architectural. The silence here was different too. It was the deep, humming silence of immense wealth and power. "This will be your residence for now," Julian said, gesturing to the space as if it were a simple guest room. "My personal staff will see to your needs. A full medical team is on standby at the hospital. They have been briefed. My mother will be here in the morning." "She is insistent." Aris stared at him, overwhelmed. "Why are you doing this?" He finally put the tablet aside and gave her his full attention. "Marcus Vance is a liability. He has built his reputation on your work. The Thorne-Vance protocol for pediatric aortic stenosis is, I have come to understand, entirely the Thorne protocol. He is a fraud, and fraud creates instability. I do not tolerate instability in my organization." She was stunned into silence. He knew. He had always known. "Furthermore," Julian continued, his voice dropping slightly, "he discarded a pregnant woman. A woman carrying his child and who was, for a time, under his care. This is an offense not merely against professional ethics, but against a more fundamental code. It is an act of profound dishonor, and dishonor creates complications." He paused, his dark eyes holding hers. "I do not tolerate complications." He had not spoken of justice or morality or compassion. He spoke of assets and liabilities, of stability and complications. It was the cold, pragmatic language of his world. And yet, in its own way, it was the most reassuring thing she had ever heard. He was not acting out of pity. He was acting out of a ruthless, logical assessment of the situation. He was restoring order. The next few days were a blur of disorienting care. A nutritionist planned her meals. A private physician came for daily checkups, and, as promised, Julian's mother arrived. Mrs. Choi was a small, elegant woman with eyes as sharp as her son's, but warmed by a genuine kindness. She did not fuss. She simply sat with Eris, talking about art, about gardening, about her stubborn, brilliant son. She saw Eris not as a project or an asset, but as a woman on the verge of motherhood. She brought a home-cooked seaweed soup, rich and nourishing. "For the baby's strength," she'd said, her smile gentle. Eris found herself slowly, cautiously letting her guard down. The constant low-level hum of anxiety that had been her companion for 9 months began to fade. She slept through the night for the first time in memory. But she was a surgeon. She was a doer, a fixer. The passivity of her new life chafed. One evening, when Julian returned from his day, a day she knew was spent commanding his various empires, she was waiting for him in the vast living area, a tablet in her hand. "I need access to the hospital's network," she said, without preamble. "There is a new patient, Lee Ji-hoon, 7 years old, complex congenital heart disease. The surgical plan they've proposed is too conservative. It will require a second, more dangerous operation in 5 years. There is a better way, a single procedure. I have the schematics in my head." Julian looked at her, his expression unreadable. He had expected fear, or gratitude, or dependence. He had not expected a surgical consultation. He had underestimated her focus, her sheer, unyielding drive. He was working from an incomplete file. He took the tablet from her, his fingers brushing hers. A jolt, small and electric, passed between them. He typed a few commands into the device. "You have full access," he said. "Level 1 clearance, higher than Vance's. A secure terminal will be installed in your study tomorrow." He did not question her diagnosis. He did not doubt her ability. He simply provided the tools. For the first time, Iris felt a flicker of something other than fear or gratitude toward this quiet, powerful man. She felt seen, correctly. The days settled into a new rhythm. Eris worked remotely, consulting on cases, refining surgical protocols, her mind once again sharp and engaged. She spoke with Mrs. Choi. She ate the nourishing food. She watched the city from her glass wall. Julian was a quiet presence. He would leave before she woke and return late in the evening. They would sometimes share a silent meal, the only sounds the clink of silverware and the distant hum of the city. He never asked about Marcus. He never spoke of the past. He was focused only on the present and the future. One night, as they sat on the balcony, the warm night air a welcome change from the sterile chill of the penthouse, she finally broke the silence. "He will not let this go," she said softly. "Marcus, when he finds out, he will see me as a possession that has been stolen. He will see the baby as his property." Julian did not look at her. He stared out at the sprawling city. "He is under the misapprehension that he still possesses things to lose," he said, his voice calm. "My team has been conducting a full audit of his department, of his publications, of his personal finances. The picture is unflattering. A corporate metaphor for utter ruin. He has been borrowing against his reputation for years. It is a debt that is about to be called in." "You're going to destroy him," she whispered. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of dawning realization. "I am going to correct a data entry error," Julian said. He was placed in a position he did not earn and could not sustain. "The system is self-regulating. I am merely expediting the process." He turned to her then, his gaze direct. "You do not need to concern yourself with Marcus Vance ever again. He has been archived." And yet, a ghost could still haunt. Marcus, finding all his official channels to her blocked, his inquiries at the hospital met with polite, unyielding stonewalls, grew desperate. His arrogance, the very core of his personality, could not process his own sudden irrelevance. He could not conceive of a world where Eris was not, on some level, pining for him, waiting for him to rescue her from her own foolish decision. He saw Julian Choi's intervention not as a protective measure, but as a hostile takeover. His fatal miscalculation came in the form of an engraved invitation. The Obsidian Gala, the hospital's largest annual fundraising event. It was Marcus's stage, his kingdom. He was scheduled to give the keynote address, to bask in the adulation of the city's elite. He assumed Eris would be there, on Julian Choi's arm, a trophy to be displayed. He would confront her. He would be magnanimous, forgiving. He would reclaim what was his in the most public way possible, shaming the chairman and reasserting his own dominance. It was a fantasy born of profound delusion. He had not realized the script had been rewritten, and he was no longer the star. He was the villain, and his final scene was approaching. Eris had no intention of going. The thought of being in the same room as Marcus, of enduring the whispers and stares, was suffocating, but Julian was insistent. "It is necessary," he'd said, his logic unassailable. "Your reintroduction to the medical community must be handled correctly. It cannot be as a victim, hiding in the shadows. It must be as a peer, a leader, on your own terms." He paused. "I will be with you. You will not be unsafe." The night of the gala, a gown was delivered to her rooms. It was a deep emerald silk, a masterpiece of architectural precision that draped over her pregnant form, not to hide it, but to celebrate it. It was a queen's garment. When she emerged, Julian was waiting. He was in a black tuxedo that seemed cut from the night sky itself. He looked at her, and for the first time, his cool, appraising gaze softened into something that looked almost like wonder. He did not offer empty compliments. He simply held out his arm. "Are you ready, Dr. Thorne?" Walking into the grand ballroom of the Shilla Hotel on Julian Choi's arm was like parting the sea. The chatter of 1,000 conversations faltered. The music seemed to dip in volume. All eyes turned to them, to the enigmatic chairman, and to the beautiful, heavily pregnant woman at his side, a woman they all recognized as the prodigy who had vanished 9 months ago. Whispers followed them like a rustling wind. Eris held her head high, her hand resting on Julian's arm. She felt his stillness, his absolute calm, and drew strength from it. He guided her to the head table, a quiet island in a sea of curiosity. He introduced her to board members and department heads, his voice calm and proprietary. "You all know Dr. Eris Thorne," he would say, leaving no room for questions. Then she saw him. Marcus was standing across the room, a glass of champagne in his hand, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. The relaxed posture, the confident swagger, it was all gone. He looked like a man who had just seen his own obituary. He saw her, not cowed and hidden, but radiant and powerful. He saw her on the arm of the one man he could not challenge, and his ego, a fragile thing for all its bluster, shattered. He started toward them, his movements jerky, heedless of the people he bumped into. He was a missile locked onto its target. Julian saw him coming. He placed a hand on Eris's arm, a subtle, reassuring pressure. He did not move. He simply waited. Marcus stopped before their table, his face flushed, his eyes wild. "Eris," he said, his voice too loud, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. "What is this? What are you doing here with him?" Eris looked at him, at the man who had terrorized her with his coldness, who had dismissed her and their child as an inconvenience. And she felt nothing. The fear was gone. He was just a man, smaller and weaker than she remembered. "I was invited," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Invited?" he sneered. He gestured at her belly with his champagne flute, the liquid sloshing over the rim. "You have an obligation. To me. To our child. You can't just disappear and then show up like this, pretending everything is fine." Julian Choi rose to his feet. He did not rush. He moved with the unhurried grace of a predator that knows the hunt is already over. He stood between Eris and Marcus, a silent, immovable wall. "Dr. Vance," Julian said, his voice dangerously soft. The entire ballroom had fallen silent now. This was not a scene. It was an execution. "I believe you are mistaken. Dr. Thorne has no obligations to you." "She is carrying my child," Marcus spat, his desperation making him reckless. She owes me an explanation." "She owes you nothing," Julian replied, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more chilling than a shout. He gestured to a woman standing discreetly nearby. It was his assistant, Ms. Kwan, and she was holding a tablet. "We have, however, been reviewing what the hospital owes you. Or rather, what you owe the hospital." Ms. Kwan handed Julian the tablet. He angled it so Marcus could see the screen. "This is the submission data for the Thorne-Vance protocol. The timestamps are interesting. All of the foundational research, the core schematics, were uploaded from Dr. Thorne's home servers, often late at night. Your contributions appear to be limited to adding your name to the title page and submitting the final document from your office computer. That is plagiarism on a scale that borders on performance art." Marcus's face went pale. "That's a lie. We collaborated." Julian swiped the screen. "This is your financial disclosure. You declared funding from 3 separate research grants for the same project, a project for which the primary research had already been completed. By Dr. Thorne. That is fraud." He swiped the screen again. "And this. This is the most troubling. This is a copy of the severance agreement you had Dr. Thorne sign, the one with the non-disclosure clause. It was drafted by your personal lawyer, not the hospital's legal team. A flagrant breach of protocol. It is, in essence, a confession. You paid for her silence because you knew you were stealing her work." Marcus stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing silently. He was looking at the complete, systematic dismantling of his life, laid out in neat corporate bullet points. "The board convened an emergency session this afternoon, Dr. Vance," Julian continued, his voice the calm, dispassionate tone of a judge delivering a final verdict. "Your credentials have been suspended, pending a full investigation. The ethics committee will be contacting you, as will the district attorney's office. Your assets have been frozen, effective 1 hour ago. The car you arrived in is no longer yours. The apartment you live in is owned by a subsidiary of my company, and your lease has been terminated due to a breach of the morality clause. You are, as of this moment, a man with no job, no money, and no reputation. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a public beheading. Marcus Vance did something Eris had never seen him do before. He broke. The arrogant mask crumbled, revealing the terrified, hollow man beneath. He dropped to his knees. He actually dropped to his knees in the middle of the obsidian gala, in front of everyone. "No," he whimpered, his voice cracking. "Please, Julian, Chairman Choi. Please, I can fix this. I can—" Julian looked down at him, not with contempt, but with a profound, chilling indifference. The look one gives to a piece of faulty equipment before having it removed. "Security," he said, his voice calm. Two large men in dark suits materialized, moving with an efficiency that suggested they had been waiting for this exact cue. They lifted Marcus to his feet as he began to sob, a raw, ugly sound that echoed in the silent ballroom. He was not begging for Aris or for his child. He was begging for his career, for his money, for the hollow shell of a life he had built. Not because he was sorry, but because he was caught. As they dragged him away, a pathetic, weeping ruin, Julian turned back to the room. He took the microphone from the podium. His voice, calm and steady, filled the hall. "My apologies for the interruption," he said. "There was a staffing issue that needed to be addressed. Now, if I may have your attention, we are here tonight to celebrate the future of medicine, and that future is defined by brilliance, integrity, and innovation. To that end, it is my distinct honor to announce the funding of a new state-of-the-art pediatric cardiac wing at our hospital." A wave of polite applause rippled through the room. Julian held up a hand. "This initiative will require a leader of unparalleled vision and skill," he continued, his eyes finding Aris at the table. He extended a hand toward her. "A leader we are fortunate to already have. I would like to introduce you to the surgeon who will be heading this new division. The woman who has been the most capable person in every room she has ever entered. The sole architect of what will now and forever be known as the Thorn Protocol. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Eris Thorn." He began to applaud, and then the entire room, the board members, the doctors, the philanthropists, rose to their feet, their applause thundering through the ballroom. It was a wave of sound, of recognition, of vindication. Eris stood slowly, her hand on her belly, the emerald silk of her gown shimmering in the light. The sound washed over her, and for the first time she did not feel like an imposter. She felt the warm, solid weight of her own worth finally returned to her. Julian's eyes met hers across the room, and in them she saw not the Mafia boss, not the chairman, but the man who had seen her correctly from the very beginning. Later, they stood on the penthouse balcony, the sounds of the city a distant murmur below. The party was over. The ghost had been exorcised. Eris breathed in the cool night air, a slow, deep breath that felt like the first real one she'd taken in almost a year. The weight was gone. "Thank you," she said, the words inadequate but necessary. Julian stood beside her, his tie loosened, the formidable armor of his public persona slightly relaxed. "I did what was necessary to protect my assets," he said, but the corner of his mouth tilted in what might have been a smile. "She's already annoyed," he added, his gaze dropping to her stomach. "She gets that from you." Eris laughed, a genuine, unburdened sound. "It's a boy," she said. "He's already annoyed," Julian corrected himself without missing a beat. "He gets that from you." He grew serious again, turning to face her. "The directorship is yours, of course. Full autonomy, unrestricted budget. Your name will be on the building." She looked out at the lights, at the endless sprawl of the city. For so long, her world had been the size of a small, cramped apartment. Now, it felt limitless. "I don't leave because things become complicated," she said, more to herself than to him. It was the truth of her. She endured. She fixed things. "I know," he said softly. His hand came to rest on her arm, his touch warm and firm. It wasn't a gesture of passion, but of partnership, of solidarity. "That is why I chose you." The baby kicked, a strong, steady rhythm against her hand. A new life, about to begin. She looked at Julian Choi, at this quiet, complicated, dangerous man who had methodically rebuilt her world. She saw the future not as a terrifying uncertainty, but as a project to be undertaken, a family to be built, not from romance, but from something stronger, mutual respect, shared purpose, and the quiet, unshakable certainty of having finally found a place where she was safe, a place where she was seen, the kind of silence that doesn't echo, the kind that settles, a home.